The detective placed the financial records on the dining room table, and before I could even open my mouth, my father looked at me like I was a complete stranger. "How could you do this to us?" he said. His voice was low and cold, like something had already been decided. I was still trying to understand what was happening when my brother Caleb stepped forward and shook his head slowly, like the whole situation was breaking his heart. "I didn't want to believe it either," he said softly. My mother started crying. I kept saying I had nothing to do with any of it. Nobody listened. Then my father pointed at the front door and told me to leave before he called the police himself. "My name is Alyssa Vance." And in less than 5 minutes, my brother took my family, my reputation, and my entire life away from me. Caleb had always been the one my parents protected. Growing up, he could lie, skip school, and break every rule in the house, and somehow it was always someone else's fault. I was the one who stayed up late studying while he stayed out doing whatever he wanted. I was the one who worked a part-time job through college while he spent money without asking. My parents called him charming. They called me dependable. At the time, I thought dependable was a compliment. I was wrong. Being dependable in my family just meant being useful. It meant carrying the weight quietly, without complaining, and smiling while doing it. Caleb had watched me do that his whole life. So when he needed someone to take the blame, he didn't have to think too hard. He just looked at me and decided I was the safest person to destroy. The missing money from the family company had been traced back to transfers made using my login details. Every signature on the forged documents looked exactly like mine. Every record pointed to me so cleanly that it felt like someone had spent a long time arranging it that way. But my parents didn't stop to ask how it happened. They didn't question why someone with my work history would suddenly steal from her own family. They looked at the papers and acted like the matter was already settled. Caleb stood beside them the entire time, playing the role of the heartbroken brother perfectly. He kept saying he wished things were different. He kept shaking his head like he was the one in pain. But as I watched him perform, I noticed something that stayed with me. His eyes were completely calm, not sad, not confused. That was the moment I understood someone had built a trap, and I had walked straight into it. When the officers arrived at the house, my mother wouldn't look at me. She stood in the corner with her arms wrapped tightly around herself, staring at the floor. My father walked over to the detective and handed him the documents with his own hands. He didn't hesitate. He didn't even glance in my direction. Caleb put his arm around my mother and whispered something in her ear. She gave a small nod. Then the officer asked me to come with him. I looked back at my family as I moved toward the door. I kept waiting for someone to speak up, to say they wanted to hear my side, to say they needed more time before deciding something this big. But my father turned away. My mother buried her face against Caleb's shoulder. I was walked outside in handcuffs while the people who were supposed to love me most stood silently inside and let it happen. By the next morning, everyone knew. My aunt called before sunrise and told me I had broken the family's heart. Cousin sent me a single word by text. Disgusting. People I had worked alongside for 3 years went quiet when I reached out. Family friends who had known me since I was a child acted like we had never met. Caleb hadn't just framed me inside the house. He had made sure the story traveled fast and wide. I found out later that he had called several relatives the same evening, telling them what had happened, in a voice filled with fake sadness. He controlled the story before I ever had a chance to give my version. By the time I tried to explain myself, no one wanted to hear it. The version Caleb had handed them was already planted deep. I was a thief, liar, a daughter who had stolen from her own parents. My parents didn't stop with the arrest. Within 3 days, my name was removed from the company payroll. My access card stopped working. The apartment above the family office, the one I had been renting from my father at a low rate, was suddenly no longer available. He sent me a short, flat text telling me to clear my things out before the weekend. Caleb moved into a larger office. He started attending meetings that used to be mine. He picked up my responsibilities without blinking, as if he had been quietly rehearsing for exactly this moment. And maybe he had. I packed 2 bags and left with nowhere to go. Every late night I had worked, every weekend I had given up, every time I said yes when I wanted to say no. All of it erased in an afternoon by a folder of forged papers and my brother's steady, convincing voice. I tried calling my parents every day for 2 solid weeks. My father picked up once. I begged him to just hear me out. I told him I had nothing to do with the missing money. I asked him to look more carefully at the records. "We saw the proof," he said. That was all. He hung up before I could get another word in. My mother never answered at all. One evening I drove past the house and sat outside in the dark for almost an hour. The lights were on inside. I could see the outline of someone moving through the kitchen window. I thought about walking up to the door and knocking. Instead, I started the car and drove away. I already knew the truth in my chest. Even if I stood inside that living room and swore on everything that mattered to me, they would still trust the paperwork more than they trusted me. At the company, Caleb turned himself into the hero of the whole story. He told employees that turning in his own sister had been the hardest thing he had ever done in his life. He said he had done it to protect the family and the business, because integrity had to come first. People believed every word. My former co-worker Tina told me that some employees had actually thanked him for his courage. One of the oldest staff members had reportedly called him a man of real character. Caleb accepted every compliment with a humble nod and a sad, tired smile, like the whole thing had cost him dearly. He had built himself into something admirable using my humiliation as his foundation. Every time someone praised him, it was because of what he had done to me. He hadn't just stolen my job and my family. He had used my pain to make himself look good. I rented a small room from an older woman named Patrice who lived on the quiet edge of town. It was a simple space. A single bed, a narrow window, and a bathroom shared with 2 other tenants. I took whatever temporary work I could find. Data entry, filing, answering phones for a short-staffed office downtown. I watched every cent carefully and ate the cheapest meals I could manage. At night, when the room went dark and quiet, I thought about Caleb. Not always with anger at first. Mostly with a kind of hollow, heavy disbelief. We had shared the same house growing up. The same holidays, the same birthday cakes, the same car rides. I had helped him with homework more times than I could remember. I had covered for him when he needed me to. And he had looked me in the eye and let me take the fall for something he had done alone. The criminal case eventually slowed and stalled. My court-appointed lawyer told me the evidence, while convincing on the surface, was largely circumstantial. No formal charges were filed. I was not going to prison. I understood I was supposed to feel relieved. Instead, I felt almost nothing. Because my family still believed I was guilty. Caleb still had everything. He was still working at the company, still living the life he had stolen, while I was renting a single room and eating sandwiches for dinner most nights. Being legally cleared changed nothing in the world I had lost. My parents didn't call when the case faded away. No relative reached out to wonder if perhaps they had been wrong. The story Caleb had written about me was still the one people repeated. I had escaped prison, but I was still trapped inside the version of myself he had created and handed to everyone I knew. Months after everything collapsed, I began hearing small details. A distant cousin mentioned casually at a mutual friend's gathering that Caleb had paid off a large personal debt right around the time I was blamed. I asked her to say that again. She told me she had heard he owed a significant amount of money to people he had been very careful to keep hidden from our parents. Gambling debts. And shortly after my name became attached to the missing company funds, that debt had quietly disappeared. No one had connected the 2 things at the time. Why would they? The family had already made their decision. But as I stood there listening to her talk, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't just a feeling anymore. Timeline was forming. Caleb had needed money badly enough to steal it. When discovery became a risk, he had made the trail point somewhere else. Somewhere like me. A few weeks later, I found out my parents had attended a dinner hosted by one of their longtime business partners. Caleb had been there with them. My father had apparently stood up in front of the room and praised him openly, calling him the backbone of the family and saying he was proud of how Caleb had handled such a painful situation with maturity and strength. My mother had reportedly wiped her eyes while people applauded. Tina had been at the dinner as part of the office group. She texted me afterward to say she was sorry. She said watching it felt wrong. I thanked her and put my phone down. I sat in my small room for a long time after that message. And something inside me that had been quietly waiting finally woke up fully. I was done grieving everything I had lost. I was going to build the case that took it all back. I started carefully and quietly. I pulled up every personal email connected to the company during the months before everything fell apart. I wrote a detailed timeline on paper, matching transfer dates to dates when I knew for certain I had been nowhere near a computer. I reached out to Tina and asked if she still had access to certain internal system records. She said she would see what she could do and be careful about it. I told her to take her time. I wasn't looking to make noise yet. I was looking to understand exactly what Caleb had done and precisely how he had done it. I needed the complete picture before I showed anyone a single piece of it. Caleb had taken his time building his trap. I was going to take mine, taking it apart, carefully and completely, until there was nothing left holding his version of the story together. While I worked quietly in the background, Caleb was living loudly. He bought a new car and made sure people at the office noticed it. He took a vacation and posted photographs online. He wore expensive clothes and spoke about the company's future like he had built it single-handedly. The more comfortable he became, the less careful he was. Tina told me he had started making small errors at work. Figure entered incorrectly here. A transfer logged under the wrong date there. A few people had noticed but weren't sure what to make of it yet. I told her to keep watching and not say anything. Careless people leave trails everywhere they go. And the more certain Caleb was that he had one, the more careless he was going to become. I needed him exactly where he was, comfortable, confident, and completely convinced that I was a finished chapter. While I gathered evidence, I made another decision. I was not going to wait for my life to be handed back to me. I was going to build it myself. I applied for a full-time position at an administrative firm across town. Got the job. The pay wasn't impressive, but it was steady and it was mine. I opened a savings account and began putting money aside each month, even when the amounts felt small. I found a better apartment, just a studio, nothing remarkable, but my name was on the lease. No one could take it from me. I started sleeping through the night again. I started cooking proper meals. I wasn't happy yet, but I was stable. And stability was exactly what Caleb had tried to destroy permanently. Building it back, piece by deliberate piece, felt like the quietest and most powerful kind of defiance. He had tried to erase me. I was still here. Tina came through in a way I hadn't fully expected. She had been digging carefully through older company records and found something buried under layers of routine entries. A secondary account, not listed under any recognized company name, had received irregular transfers going back several years. Following the account trail carefully led to a personal account registered under a name Caleb had used casually as a teenager, an old nickname tied to an email address most people in the company had long forgotten existed. My hands shook when I read through everything Tina sent over. This wasn't just about the money I had been accused of taking. Caleb had been quietly draining company funds for years before that night. The theft pinned on me was the moment he had gotten too greedy and needed a cover story fast enough to protect himself. I had not been his first theft. I had been his insurance policy. I made a mistake. I was so certain one piece of solid evidence would be enough that I brought it directly to my mother. Just one document, a printed transfer record with Caleb's hidden account details clearly highlighted. I knocked on her door on a Tuesday evening and handed it to her calmly. I explained what it showed. I told her there was more where it came from. She studied the paper for a long, quiet moment. Then she looked up at me. "You made this yourself," she said. "You're trying to drag your brother down because you can't stand watching him succeed." She pushed the paper back across the table toward me. I drove home without speaking. I cried for a while once I was inside. Then I stopped. I had needed to know whether there was any version of the truth she was willing to hear. Now I had my answer. I would not be doing this for her approval. Caleb must have heard from my mother about my visit almost immediately. 3 days later he appeared outside my workplace. He sat in his dark blue car and waited until I stepped outside during my lunch break. He called my name. I stopped walking. He came toward me slowly, hands in his pockets, wearing the same calm expression he always used when he felt completely safe. "Whatever you think you found," he said quietly, "nobody is going to believe you. You already played that card and lost." He said it without raising his voice, almost gently, like he was warning me out of concern. I looked at him. The brother I had covered for. The brother I had helped with homework. The brother who had stood calmly in our parents' living room and watched me walk outside in handcuffs. "Okay," I said. Then I turned around and went back inside. He had no idea how much I already had waiting. After Caleb's visit, I went back through everything with sharper focus. The deeper I looked, the worse it became. The hidden account had received transfers going back almost 4 full years. Long before the night that destroyed my life. Caleb hadn't stolen once in a desperate moment. He had been carefully and methodically taking money for years, small amounts at first, then larger ones as his confidence grew. The theft he pinned on me was simply the point where he had gotten greedy and scared at the same time. His gambling debts had grown faster than his slow drain could cover, so he took a larger amount, panicked when the numbers flagged, and pointed the finger at me before anyone could look his way. Exposing him wouldn't just clear my name. It would show everyone exactly what he was and had always been underneath the charming, dependable image they had praised him for. My father made a formal announcement. He was planning to step back from running the company and hand full leadership to Caleb. He had set a date for a celebration dinner at the family home, relatives and key company staff, a proper gathering to mark the transition. I found out through Tina, who had received her invitation through the office. She said my father had looked proud every time Caleb's name came up in conversation. I sat with that news for an entire day. My father was about to hand everything he had spent his life building to the man who had been stealing from him for years, the same man who had watched his daughter be taken away in handcuffs and said nothing. I thought about every document I had, every transfer, every timestamp. Every connection between the hidden account and the company funds. It was time to stop collecting and start moving. I spent 2 weeks organizing everything into one clean, careful file. I printed every transfer record in chronological order. I printed the account registration details and the evidence linking them to Caleb's old nickname and email. I built a written timeline showing the money movements alongside the precise dates his gambling debts were paid down. I had Tina write a clear, factual statement describing what she had personally observed and when. Then I took the entire file to a lawyer named Patricia who specialized in financial fraud. She read through everything slowly and thoroughly. When she looked up, she told me the documentation was solid. She said it told a story that was hard to argue against. She offered to help me present it properly when I was ready. I told her I was ready now. I had been ready for a long time. I just needed everything in order before I moved because I only planned to move once. The dinner was scheduled for a Friday evening at the family home. Tina confirmed the guest list was around 30 people, a mix of family and company staff. My parents had organized everything carefully. A short speech from my father, a toast, and then the formal announcement of Caleb's new role. No one had invited me. My father hadn't sent so much as a text. I found the address of a nearby florist and placed a small delivery order to the house that morning, just to confirm the exact arrival time. Then I put on the most composed outfit I owned, picked up my folder, and drove across town. I sat in my car down the street for 20 minutes, watching the lights inside the house, listening to my own breathing. My heart was pounding harder than I expected. But my hands, resting on the folder in my lap, were completely steady. I had worked too long to walk away now. I walked through the front door just as my father was in the middle of his speech. The room went still. My mother's face went pale. Caleb turned slowly, and for the first time in over a year, I saw something flicker behind his calm eyes. Something very close to fear. I asked for 5 minutes. My father started to tell me to leave. But a senior employee named Burton, a man who had known my father for decades, gently suggested he might want to hear what I had to say. My father hesitated. That was all I needed. I opened the folder. I walked the room through every transfer record in order. Every date. Every connection between the hidden account and Caleb's gambling payments. I explained the timeline from the beginning to the night they sent me out in handcuffs. The room was completely silent the entire time. I spoke clearly and steadily, exactly as I had practiced alone in my apartment, until there was nothing left unsaid. Caleb tried to call everything fabricated. He said I had been obsessed with destroying him ever since I got caught, that this was my last desperate attempt to shift blame. But Burton asked to look at the documents himself. Another employee pulled out his phone and began cross-referencing dates against records he could access on the company system right there in the room. My father sat down heavily in his chair. His face had gone a dull gray color. My mother kept looking back and forth between me and Caleb, as if waiting for one of us to say it had all been a misunderstanding. Then my father asked Caleb one single question. Just one. Is any of this real? Caleb was silent for a long moment. Far too long. And in that silence, everything collapsed around him. He began to talk. Slowly at first. Then faster. He admitted to the account. He admitted to the transfers. The golden child was gone. What remained was someone none of them recognized. My parents cried. My father reached for my hand. My mother repeated she was sorry over and over in a voice I had never once heard from her before that night. I looked at them both and took my time. I thought about the evening they watched me walk out in handcuffs without a word. I thought about the morning my access card stopped working. I thought about every call they didn't answer, every door they closed, every month I spent eating cheap meals in a rented room while Caleb drove his new car and took his vacations. The apology was genuine. I believed that much. But it couldn't give back the year I had lost or the person I had to become just to survive it. I told them I was glad the truth was finally out. I told them I hoped they would hold Caleb accountable the right way this time. Then I picked up my folder, walked out of that house and drove home. My name was restored. My proof was solid. And for the first time in more than a year, I belonged entirely to myself again.